In 2 Kings chapter 6, there is a fascinating story about Elisha. A foreign king was very angry with Elisha and wanted to capture him. So he found out the city that Elisha was living in and sent a massive army to capture him. So they came at night and surrounded the city, waiting to move in and capture Elisha. So that the next morning, Elisha's servant looked out the window and saw the city surrounded by this massive foreign army. And of course, he understandably panicked because he knew they were there to capture Elisha. So he became very frightened. And of course, he reported this to Elisha and, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Now, Elisha, I don't think he even got off his chair to even look. Elisha just coolly said, oh, there's nothing to worry about. There's more with us than with them. Now, you can imagine the servant's response is like what? What am I missing? And then Elijah asked God to open the servant's spiritual eyes to see the reality of what the situation was. And so then when his eyes were open, he saw that the surrounding hills behind the army was full of horses and chariots of fire. In other words, God's army. And so that's why Elisha just wasn't worried at all. Didn't even bother to go out and look, I don't think. And so what he explained to the servant was that they had such protection because God's army was so much greater. And of course, there was no threat and Elisha wasn't harmed and the other army went home eventually. So you see, what happened was that Elisha knew how to live in two realms. And you see, all humans are designed to live in two realms, the natural realm and the spiritual realm. And that's what makes us different from the animal kingdom. We're the only species that can live in two realms. But Elisha was continuously conscious that he was living in a supernatural as well as a natural realm. And we as Christians, with the Holy Spirit living inside us, we have that same privilege. And so the servant's fear was abolished when Elisha asked God to open his spiritual eyes so he could get a supernatural or God's perspective on the situation. And that's why Elisha never got worried at all. Now, have you ever been totally overwhelmed and fearful about a situation that you were facing? Well, I'm sure you have. I mean, we all have. And that's because we look at these things in the natural realm, on the human natural plane with our natural eyes. But remember, you live in two realms. So you have every right and privilege, and you have the ability to look at any situation through the supernatural side, especially if you have the Holy Spirit living inside you. And so what I want to encourage you is to, one, be aware that you are living in two realms simultaneously. You have spiritual eyes and you have natural eyes, just that our spiritual eyes, we don't use them very often, so they're just not well developed. And that's why we focus on the natural and get all frightened. So the next time you face a difficult, overwhelming, or frightening situation, ask God what is His perspective. Ask Him to open your spiritual eyes so you can look at it from above rather than within the situation. And ask God, what does He want you to know about the situation? How does He want you to pray about it? How does He want you to think about it? And that will completely change your response to the situation that on the natural realm is overwhelming or intimidating. Because it is your right as a Christian. The Holy Spirit lives inside you. He loves to do this. He loves to comfort His children. He wants us to be aware that we're seated in heaven with Christ so that we have every right to look at things from the supernatural perspective. So I want to encourage you this week, change your perspective. Appreciate that you're living in two realms. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever actually asked God for a supernatural view of the situation you're in? Because if you've tried this and it has really helped you, I want you to leave your testimony below the video, because I'm sure it will encourage someone else. And if this is your first visit here, you need to get my free self-assessment guide. And to do that, just subscribe to my weekly email newsletter. So I'll talk to you again next week, but this week, have a higher perspective. Look at things through your spiritual eyes, and you don't have to be frightened anymore.